I've been a trucker for over 20 years. In that time, I've driven through storms that could rip the roof off a building, encountered some of the most dangerous roads you can imagine, and dealt with all kinds of strange people. But nothing compares to the night I had on a deserted highway in Utah. It was the dead of winter, the air so cold that every breath I took seemed to freeze in my chest. I was hauling a shipment of medical supplies, heading west toward Nevada. The route was supposed to be straightforward, mostly long, empty stretches of road through the desert. But as the hours wore on, the solitude began to weigh on me. That night, the highway was deserted. Not a single pair of headlights in either direction. It was just me, the endless road, and the black void of the desert stretching out on either side. My truck's cab was warm, the low hum of the engine steady and comforting. But something about the emptiness outside made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd just been driving too long. I hadn't slept much the night before, and I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, around 2 a.m., I saw something up ahead, a faint glow on the horizon. As I got closer, I realized it was a gas station. It didn't make any sense. I'd driven this route dozens of times, and I knew for a fact there weren't any gas stations along this stretch of highway. But there it was, an old, run-down station, its sign flickering faintly in the cold night air. I considered driving past it. My tank was full, and I didn't really need anything. But something about the place drew me in. Maybe it was the flickering light, or the strange sense of unease that had been gnawing at me all night. I pulled into the lot and killed the engine. The station looked abandoned. The windows were dirty, the pumps rusted and ancient, but the lights inside were on, casting a dim, yellow glow. I stepped out of the cab, the cold biting into my skin. My boots crunched against the frozen gravel as I approached the door. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow. They led from the pumps to the front door, then veered off around the side of the building. I stopped, my breath fogging the air. The prints were fresh, too fresh. I stepped closer, peering around the corner of the building, but all I saw was darkness. The wind picked up, whistling through the empty lot. I turned back to the door, pushing it open with a creak. Inside, the station was eerily silent. The place looked frozen in time. Shelves of dusty snacks lined the walls, their expiration dates long past. An old cash register sat on the counter, its keys worn smooth from years of use. And then there was the smell. A sickly sweet odor, faint but unmistakable. I moved toward the counter, my boots echoing on the cracked tile floor. Behind the register, there was a door slightly ajar, a faint glow spilling out into the room. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I glanced back at the front door, my truck visible through the glass. For a moment, I thought about leaving, but something made me stay. I stepped around the counter and pushed the door open. Beyond it was a small back room, cluttered with boxes and cleaning supplies. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table was a red envelope. I stared at it, my heart pounding. It wasn't just the envelope itself that unsettled me. It was the way it was placed, perfectly centered, as if waiting for me. I hesitated before picking it up. The paper felt cold and smooth in my hands. I turned it over, but there was no name, no address. Just the envelope. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and written on it, in precise, careful handwriting, "You shouldn't have stopped." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I looked around the room, my eyes darting to the shadows in the corners. "Is someone here?" I called out. Silence. But then, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, coming from outside. I shoved the note into my pocket and moved back toward the front of the store. Through the glass door, I could see the lot bathed in the pale light of my truck's headlights. And then, something moved. It was quick, darting across the lot and disappearing into the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped outside, the cold air cutting into me like a knife. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response. But then I saw it. Another red envelope, sitting on the hood of my truck. I stared at the red envelope on the hood of my truck, my stomach twisting in knots. The cold air stung my face, but I barely noticed it. My eyes were glued to the envelope, the way it sat there, perfectly centered, like it had been waiting for me. I glanced around the empty lot, my breath fogging in the air. The wind howled softly, kicking up bits of snow and gravel. But there was no sign of movement, no sign of whoever, or whatever, had left it there. My hands trembled as I stepped forward. Each crunch of my boots against the frozen ground seemed deafening in the silence. When I reached the hood of the truck, I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me not to touch it, to get back in the cab and drive as far away as I could. But some strange pull forced my hand. I picked up the envelope. The paper was cold and smooth, just like the one I'd found in the gas station. My fingers trembled as I opened it, pulling out the single sheet of paper inside. And when I read the message, my blood ran cold. "You're not alone." I froze, the note crumpling slightly in my grip. My eyes darted to the shadows beyond the edge of the lot, searching for any sign of movement. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. Silence. The lot stretched out in front of me, bathed in the dim glow of my truck's headlights. Beyond that was nothing but darkness, the vast, empty desert stretching endlessly in every direction. But I knew someone was there. I could feel it. I shoved the note into my pocket and climbed into the cab, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, the sound of the deadbolt clicking into place oddly comforting. The interior of the truck felt safe, familiar. But as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at the mirrors, the windows. The empty highway stretched out behind me, illuminated by the faint glow of the taillights. And then, something moved. Just for a second, in the corner of my side mirror. A shadow. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. But the air felt heavy now, thick with an unseen presence. I started the engine, the familiar rumble steadying my nerves. My hands trembled as I shifted into gear, my eyes flicking between the mirrors and the road ahead. I just needed to keep driving. Whatever this was, whoever this was, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless and empty. The hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires against the pavement usually soothed me, but tonight it only added to my unease. The note kept replaying in my mind. "You're not alone." It didn't make any sense. The road had been empty all night. I hadn't seen another car in hours, let alone another person. But then, I glanced at the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. There, in the reflection, I saw something. A figure, sitting in the back of the cab. It was only for a second, a fleeting glimpse before the mirror went dark again. But I knew what I'd seen. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt in the middle of the highway. My breathing was ragged, my chest tight as I turned around, expecting to see someone, or something, sitting behind me. But the cab was empty. The sleeper area was dark, the blankets on the bed undisturbed. Nothing. No one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Then, slowly, I shifted back into gear. The truck lurched forward, the tires crunching against the asphalt as I forced myself to keep driving. The highway seemed darker now, the desert beyond the road an impenetrable void. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see the figure again. But the cab remained empty, the only sound the low hum of the engine. And then, a noise. Soft at first, almost inaudible over the rumble of the truck. A faint tapping sound, coming from the sleeper area behind me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The tapping grew louder, steadier, like someone was knocking. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection showed the same empty cab. But then, in the corner of the mirror, a shadow moved. I slammed on the brakes again, the truck skidding to a stop. The tapping stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the faint hum of the engine. I turned around, my heart hammering in my chest. The sleeper area was dark, the shadows deeper than they should have been. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. But then, just as I started to turn back toward the wheel, I saw it. A single red envelope, sitting neatly on the bed, waiting. My hands shook as I reached for it, the cab suddenly feeling unbearably cold. I opened the envelope, pulling out the folded piece of paper inside, and written on it, in the same precise handwriting, "It's too late to leave." I don't remember much after that. I must have driven for hours, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly I could barely feel them. The highway stretched on endlessly, the darkness pressing in around me. But the notes didn't stop. Every time I glanced at the sleeper area, there was another red envelope, each one with a new message. "You can't escape. I'm already here. See you soon." By the time I reached a truck stop, the sun was just beginning to rise. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. The lot was busy, other truckers milling around, the sound of engines and voices a welcome relief from the oppressive silence of the night. I tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed me. When I returned to my truck, the envelopes were gone. Every single one. The only thing left was the faint smell of something sweet, like roses, lingering in the air. That was 6 months ago. I haven't driven that route since, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on the road, I hear it. The faint tapping, coming from the sleeper area behind me. And I know, deep down, I'm not alone. I never was, and I never will be. There's an unspoken rule among truckers. Stay off Old County Road 16 after dark. I've been hauling freight for over 15 years, and while I'm not one to believe in superstitions, I've heard enough stories about that stretch of road to make me think twice about driving it. Old County Road 16 cuts through the middle of nowhere, a winding path through dense forests and overgrown farmland. There's no cell service, no gas stations, and no streetlights. Just miles of cracked asphalt and the eerie hum of the trees swaying in the wind. Most of the stories I'd heard were vague. A truck breaking down and the driver swearing they saw someone standing just beyond the tree line. Strange noises coming from the woods. Headlights that appeared out of nowhere and followed you for miles before vanishing. Nothing I could really take seriously. Until last winter. I was running late that night. I'd spent too long at my last stop, and the dispatcher was breathing down my neck to make my next delivery on time. The only way to get there was to take Old County Road 16. I thought about avoiding it, taking the longer route, but I didn't want to hear the dispatcher chewing me out for another missed deadline. So I broke the rule. I took the road, and I've regretted it ever since. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead silent. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world has stopped. No wind, no crickets, no rustling leaves. Just the low hum of my truck's engine and the faint crackle of the CB radio. I glanced out the window as I drove, the beam of my headlights barely penetrating the darkness. The trees on either side of the road loomed like shadows, their branches twisting together overhead to form a tunnel of black. I turned up the radio, hoping for some background noise to break the tension, but all I got was static. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that the stories I'd heard were just getting to me. But deep down, I felt it, that strange, electric tension in the air. Like I wasn't alone. It was around midnight when I saw it. A car, parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. As I got closer, I could see the hood was open, steam rising into the cold night air. The driver's side door was hanging open, the interior light casting a faint glow onto the pavement. I slowed down, scanning the area for any sign of the driver, but there was no one there. The car looked old, rusted, battered, like it had been sitting there for years. I thought about stopping, but something about the scene felt off. The way the car was angled, like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The way the trees seemed to press closer around it, their branches stretching toward the road. I kept driving, but as I passed the car, my headlights caught something in the trees. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an odd angle. My chest tightened. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. But the figure was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I drove, the feeling of unease only grew. The trees seemed closer now, their branches scraping against the side of the truck like fingernails on a chalkboard. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of my tires against the cracked asphalt. And then, the engine sputtered. I froze, my heart pounding as the truck lurched forward, the dashboard lights flickering. "Come on," I muttered, gripping the wheel. The engine sputtered again, then died completely. The truck coasted to a stop, the headlights dimming until I was left in complete darkness. I sat there for a moment, my breathing shaky. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not on this road. I reached for the key, turning it in the ignition. The engine groaned but didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. The CB radio crackled to life, a burst of static that made me jump. "Hello?" I said, grabbing the receiver. "Is anyone there?" The static faded, replaced by a faint, garbled voice. "You shouldn't have stopped." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I said, my voice shaking. Silence. And then, the sound of footsteps. Soft at first, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. But they were getting closer. I turned toward the window, my eyes straining to see into the darkness. The trees stood still, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But then, just beyond the edge of the headlights, I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the road, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the door lock, my hands trembling. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the figure in the road. My headlights barely illuminated it, but I could see enough to know something wasn't right. Its posture was unnatural. Its head tilted too far to one side, one shoulder higher than the other, like it was leaning forward. The longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I turned the key in the ignition again, my hands trembling. The engine sputtered but didn't start. The figure took a step forward. My stomach dropped. Come on," I muttered, twisting the key harder. The engine groaned, then fell silent again. The figure took another step. I locked the doors, the sound of the click echoing in the cab. My breath fogged the windshield as I tried to think. I glanced at the CB radio, my fingers shaking as I grabbed the receiver. "This is Big Rig 527. I'm stuck on Old County Road 16 and..." The radio crackled to life, cutting me off. A voice came through the static. "They're already here." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I said into the receiver, my voice shaking. The only response was static. I looked back at the figure in the road. It was gone. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen, my eyes darting from the windshield to the mirrors. The road was empty. The trees on either side loomed like shadows, their branches stretching toward the truck. And then I heard it. A soft tapping sound, coming from the passenger side window. My head snapped toward the sound. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark trees beyond the glass. Then, something moved. A pale hand, long and thin, pressed against the window. The fingers were too long, the skin stretched taut over the bones. And behind the hand, a face, pressed against the glass. Its eyes were wide and empty, its mouth twisted into a grin that didn't reach its eyes. I scrambled back in my seat, my heart hammering in my chest. The thing tilted its head, its grin widening. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The cab was silent again, but I couldn't stop shaking. I glanced at the mirrors, the windows, the sleeper area behind me. Everything was still, but I knew I wasn't alone. I turned the key again, praying the engine would start. This time, it roared to life. I didn't wait. I slammed the truck into gear, the tires screeching against the cracked asphalt as I sped down the road. The trees blurred past me, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see that face again. But the road behind me was empty. For a while, I thought I was safe, until I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was another truck. A pair of headlights appeared behind me, bright and steady, closing the distance fast. Relief washed over me. Maybe it was another driver. Maybe they could help. I grabbed the CB radio. This is Big Rig 527. I'm on Old County Road 16. Is that you behind me? No response. The lights grew closer, brighter, until they were right on my bumper. I squinted at the mirrors, trying to make out the vehicle, but the lights were blinding, too bright to see anything. Hey! I shouted into the radio. Back off. The lights didn't move. I gritted my teeth, my hands gripping the wheel. Then, the lights swerved. They veered to the side of the road, pulling up alongside me. For a split second, I thought I'd see a car, a driver. But when I looked, there was nothing there. Just the lights, floating, keeping pace with my truck. My chest tightened. I pressed the accelerator, the truck lurching forward. But the lights stayed with me, matching my speed. I grabbed the CB radio again. Is anyone out there? This is Big Rig 527. I need help. The radio crackled. Then, through the static, I heard a voice. You shouldn't have come here. My hands shook as I dropped the receiver, my eyes flicking between the road and the lights. And then, they were gone. The lights disappeared, plunging the road into darkness. But I didn't feel relief, because the silence was worse. I kept driving, my eyes darting to the mirrors, the windows, the shadows beyond the headlights. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. The same figure I'd seen before, its head tilted, its limbs too long. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I reached for the door lock, my hand trembling. But before I could do anything, the figure was gone. And in its place, sitting in the middle of the road, was a red envelope. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the envelope. It was the same as before, bright red, perfectly placed, waiting for me. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the cab. The cold night air bit into my skin as I approached the envelope, my boots crunching against the asphalt. I picked it up, my hands shaking as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and written on it, in that same precise handwriting, "You can't leave." I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I made it back to the main highway. The next thing I remember is pulling into a truck stop, the sun just beginning to rise. I tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed me. They said I must have fallen asleep at the wheel, that it was just my imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And I know, deep down, I'll never be able to escape it. I had always liked night drives. There's something calming about the hum of the engine, the steady rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, and the endless expanse of road ahead. But there's also something isolating about it. It's just you, the truck, and whatever shadows the darkness decides to let you see. I've been a trucker for over a decade, and I've seen my share of strange things out on the road. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on Route 93. It was supposed to be a simple haul, just a load of construction supplies heading upstate. The dispatcher had warned me about the weather, but I figured I could handle it. I didn't know that the weather would be the least of my problems. The snow started around midnight. At first, it was just a light flurry, the kind that dusts the road and makes everything look soft and quiet. But as the hours went on, it got worse. The flakes grew heavier, the wind picked up, and the visibility dropped to almost nothing. I was miles from the nearest town, the radio crackling faintly with static. The road ahead was a blurry ribbon of white, barely visible through the windshield. I slowed down, my headlights cutting through the storm. The truck's cab was warm, the low rumble of the heater filling the silence. But then, I saw the car. It was pulled over on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the storm. I debated whether to stop. It was late, the weather was awful, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to help. But something about the car's position, it was tilted at an odd angle, one side dipped into a snowdrift, made me think twice. I pulled over, my tires crunching against the icy shoulder. The wind howled as I stepped out of the cab, my boots sinking into the snow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely carrying over the wind. No response. The car was dark, the driver's seat empty. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. "Is anyone there?" I called again. Still nothing. I moved closer, my breath fogging the air. The snow clung to my jacket, the cold biting into my skin. When I reached the car, I looked inside. The interior was empty, the seats dusted with snow. But there, on the dashboard, was a red envelope. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. The envelope was out of place, pristine and bright, its red color vivid against the muted gray of the car's interior. I reached inside, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. The paper felt smooth and cold, like it had been sitting there for hours. There was no name on the outside, no indication of who it was for. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and written on it, in precise, careful handwriting, "Don't pick up hitchhikers." I blinked, the words not quite registering. What the hell was this? Some kind of joke? I looked around, the snow swirling in the air. The road was empty, the trees on either side shrouded in white. Then, faintly, I heard it. A voice. Soft. Faint. "Help me." I turned toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the snow, the trees, the empty road. But then, there, just beyond the edge of the headlights, I saw a figure. It was a woman. She was standing in the snow, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her hair blowing wildly in the wind. "Hey!" I called out, moving toward her. She didn't respond. As I got closer, I noticed she wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin dress, her bare arms pale and trembling in the cold. "Are you okay?" I said, my voice rising over the wind. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and frightened. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need help." I led her back to the truck, the snow crunching beneath our feet. She was shivering violently, her skin ice cold to the touch. When we got inside, I cranked up the heat, the cab filling with warm air. "Are you hurt?" I asked, glancing at her. She shook her head, her hands trembling as she rubbed her arms. "Where did you come from?" I said. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the dashboard, her expression distant. Something about her silence unsettled me. "Do you have a name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Still nothing. She just sat there, staring at the dashboard like she wasn't really there. I glanced at the passenger seat, where I'd set the red envelope. It was gone. I stared at the empty seat, my mind racing. I was certain I'd left it there. "Did you see an envelope?" I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. The heater hummed softly, the only sound in the cab. And then, she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, her pupils dark and empty. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said. Her voice was different now, flat and cold, devoid of emotion. "What do you mean?" I said, my pulse quickening. She didn't answer. Instead, she smiled. And it wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a smile of knowing. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling against the truck. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing in the snow behind us. But the road was empty. When I looked back at the passenger seat, she was gone. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My breathing was uneven, my chest tight, my mind racing. She was just here. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't feel the cold rush of air when someone leaves a vehicle. But she was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the truck cab silent except for the soft hum of the heater. I glanced at the side mirror, then the rear view. Nothing. Just the endless snow-covered road stretching behind me. I reached over, running my hand along the seat where she had been sitting. The fabric was ice cold. And then I saw it. Another red envelope, sitting perfectly centered on the passenger seat. Waiting. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was sure the first envelope, the one from the abandoned car, had disappeared. Had she taken it? Was this a new one? I reached for it with shaking hands, the paper smooth and almost warm despite the cold. I peeled the flap open and pulled out the folded piece of paper inside. I already knew I didn't want to read it, but my eyes were drawn to the words anyway. She never left. A cold chill ran down my spine. I turned my head slowly toward the sleeper cabin behind me. The curtain was slightly open, just an inch, like someone was peeking out, watching me. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, checking for a signal. Nothing. I turned back to the road, trying to focus on driving, but my mind was racing. She never left. What the hell did that mean? She was gone. I saw it with my own eyes. Didn't I? I stole another glance at the curtain. It was moving. Not a lot. Just a slight shift. Like someone was standing behind it, breathing, watching. A heavy lump formed in my throat. I wasn't alone in the truck. I kept my eyes forward, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. I needed to stay calm. I had to be sure. Maybe it was just the truck rocking from the wind. Maybe I'd left the curtain loose when I packed my gear. Or maybe... I swallowed hard. I had to check. With one hand, I reached back slowly. My fingers brushed the fabric. Ice cold. I gave it a quick yank. The sleeper was empty. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body felt tense, my nerves on fire. But then, the heaters shut off. Not sputtered, not slowed, just stopped. The cab went silent, and the air turned frigid. I exhaled, and my breath came out in a visible white cloud. It had been warm just seconds ago. The truck shuddered, like something heavy had shifted. Behind me, I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My whole body locked up, my brain screaming at me to drive. So I did. I pressed the accelerator, the truck groaning as it picked up speed. The snow was coming down harder now, thick flakes hitting the windshield and sticking. I cranked up the defroster, but it didn't turn on. The heater, the defroster, the radio, all dead. And then, a whisper, right behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel her breath on the back of my neck. I slammed my foot down on the pedal, the truck roaring forward. I just needed to get out of here. I needed to reach a town, a gas station, anywhere with people. The road stretched ahead endlessly, nothing but white snow and black sky. I glanced at the side mirror, and my stomach dropped. There was something sitting on the roof of the trailer, a dark shape, barely visible against the night sky. Claw-like fingers digging into the metal. The shape moved, slowly, crawling, toward the cab, toward me. I gritted my teeth. Not again. I had to shake it off. I gripped the wheel and swerved hard to the right, making the trailer rock violently. The shape slid. I swerved left, then right again, trying to throw it off. For a second, I thought it worked. But then, a loud thump from the roof of the cab. My blood ran ice cold. It was right above me. I could hear it scraping. Slow, deliberate, like it was testing the metal, looking for a way in. Then, a loud bang on the windshield. A handprint, pale and too long, pressed against the glass. Fingers twitching. I didn't think. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screeching against the ice. Something flew off the roof and hit the pavement hard. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. The lights of a truck stop appeared in the distance. I barely registered pulling in, my hands still trembling. The moment I put the truck in park, I bolted out of the cab, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was normal again. The cold wasn't unnatural anymore. I turned back, staring at the truck. There was something on the windshield, a red envelope, tucked under the wiper. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I just stood there, my body frozen, but the wind shifted, and the envelope flipped open slightly, just enough for me to see the words inside. You picked her up. I left that route after that. I don't take jobs through Route 93 anymore. I don't drive in snowstorms. And I never pick up hitchhikers. Because I know one day, she'll be waiting for me again. And next time, I won't be able to throw her off. Next time, she'll take me with her.